Hello, everybody. My name is Ned Dennis, and I'm the chairperson of the International Marathon Swimming Hall of Fame. We have three guests with us today, and I'll ask each of them to introduce themselves, starting with Kevin.
Yes, I'm Kevin Murphy. I'm the co-director of the King's Swimmers training group, and I've also swum the channel 34 times, including 3 doubles, and 3 North Channels and Catalina Channel and whatever.
Narelle, you're up next.
Hi, I'm Narelle Simpson, James Pittar's coach, and been a coach of many Paralympians and Olympians and marathon swimmers for the past 40 years, so a long time.
And Jacqueline?
Hi everyone, my name is Jacqueline, based in Ireland. I'm co-director of Infinity Channel Swimming and secretary of the Irish Long Distance. Also swim coach, and based on the year's experience here, the junior currently on this panel.
What we're going to talk about today is all three of these folks have crewed for swimmers with physical disabilities. We want to explore that area and talk about it a little bit more. Kevin, over the last couple of years, Rosalind Hardiman, whose legs were rendered not very useful by polio as a child. She recently completed Loch Ness and the English Channel. Narelle Simpson, the coach of James Pittar, who's legally blind, completed everything imaginable. And Jacqueline recently crewed for Dr. Caroline Block, who's got severe hearing issues. So let's start. Narelle, talk to me about the challenge of even getting James in the water in England.
It's not him getting onto a boat or anything like that. The challenge came from getting approval from the association, because being the first blind swimmer ever, we had to explain, well, I had to explain, because we lived in Australia, so we couldn't go there and show them what he could do. We had to try and explain it via fax in those days, what he could do, and that he was never going to be in danger. So it was actually all the pre-organisation and putting it together and being able to prove to the association that he can cross that channel safely. So there was a big thing about that. Was the challenge, was how to explain what we were going to do, the equipment we were going to do, and how we were going to guide him and feed him with a loud hailer and a pool pole. So that was a very interesting conversation we had with the English Channel Association.
And Kevin, the challenge of Rosalind, particularly getting into boats.
Well, yes, the problem with Ros is actually getting her into the water and then out of the water, because she is in a wheelchair. Just for instance, things you may not appreciate. Getting her into the water, if you try and get her over a beach in her wheelchair, the wheelchair sinks into the sand, and it has to be carried. When it comes to getting into the water, she gets out of the water, out of the wheelchair, and then has to shuffle on her bottom into the into the water. In Dover, for instance, there is a slipway with weed on it, which is a rather handy slippery surface for her to shuffle into the water. During the actual swim, the problem becomes, how do you get her into the water, for instance in Loch Ness, and how do you get her out at the end? And the way we did it there was we hire boats which have got a drop down front, a bit like a landing craft, so that we're able to haul her in over the front, or scoop her up almost over the front. Then also in Loch Ness, being fresh water, how do you feed her? Because you give her a cup or a drinking beaker or something, and she disappears under the water with a sort of one arm just appearing out like holding Excalibur, you know, sort of just up in the air. So she can't float in fresh water. There's all sorts of difficulties which are they're not insurmountable, but they have to be appreciated before you get her into the water. In the channel, I'm not actually sure how they did get her into the boat in the English Channel. I think they used a rib to haul her into a rib and then into the boat. You do have some of the boats, and Andy King's, for instance, has some sort of hoist on it that gets swimmers out of the water, but you can't get her up a ladder because she hasn't got any legs that work on the ladder.
Even for anybody who's ever had the misfortune of having to get into a small boat, there seems to be two ways to do it, or three ways to do it. You put your foot on that little bit of metal on the engine, which is nearly impossible to see and about this big. The second way is you go over the side of the rib, and if they don't yank your arms out of the socket, you get completely scraped, and it's hard enough to do that. And then there's my favorite, which is the ladder. So the ladder typically will go underneath the boat when you try to get on it. Everybody smile at that one. That's always fun. Or it's about this long. So I've got a tall guy. To get my foot on the ladder is more difficult than like leaping out as like a salmon into the boat. So it's just getting into a small boat without a physical disability is just a real challenge. Jacqueline, talk to us about Dr. Caroline Block. You're not yelling, you're not loud hailing. How are you communicating?
Oh, so we were very fortunate. We had Caroline coming to us as a very astute swimmer, and we kept our communications very simple. Whilst Caroline was on the boat, she would have had her hearing devices in, and then when she goes to the water, she takes those out. So we kept our hand signals very clear, all good, okay, typical of maybe some dive signals as well, and then coming to the boat and going away from the boat if we needed her to move, and yes, if she was ready to feed, then just holding up the lines, and for her, not many reasons to give her other commands. She's great at following the boat and staying with us, and we had not much difficulties with Caroline, so it was an absolute joy to crew for her.
And Narelle, talk to us about James in the water in the English Channel. When he's going to the left, what was the protocol?
We were lucky we converted a loud timer. So we converted and put a little device on it that used to allow it to mip. So we did long hold down sound through the loud hail for left and short, sharp ones for right. So it was actually, they said it's the strangest they've seen someone go along beside a boat, because I was continually using the sounds. So he would just hear that all the time. We used a whistle to stop him for a feed. And we already had a command that if something was dangerous happening, I would continually just hold that loudspeaker down really hard, and he would know to immediately stop. There was danger, and then we'd get him into the boat. So we had that organised, but it was and I also could use a loud hailer to, once we got him ready for the feed, I would talk to him and go, we used a pool pole with a device on it and a swivel and his water bottle and a syringe, which sat in this device that we invented, that he could pull the water bottle out, was tied onto a bungee and have his drink. There was a syringe that had gel in it that he could syringe in his mouth, and off he'd go. So he'd be finished a feed in anything between 25 and 35 seconds. So it was, it was lots of experimenting, but we got it down to a fine art in the end. So it was, we did a lot of practicing when we were in Australia.
Kevin, you've crewed for a considerable number of solo swimmers. That's probably, let's leave it at that. I'm sure it's well over 100 at this point. And sometimes you're motivating by talking sweet words. Sometimes you might give them a kick. Sometimes you might ignore them. How did you motivate Roz compared to other swimmers? Were there new techniques you came up with, or was it, playbook 106 and 107?
Well, the thing about Roz is that she is a determined lady. You don't really have to motivate her. I don't know whether you know, she's just been away on holiday, and the holiday was actually in Vietnam and Cambodia, going up and down rivers, the Mekong and all the rest of it. She doesn't give in to her disability. It did start to get a bit difficult after about 15 hours in Loch Ness, when she was ceasing to make much forward progress. But and her legs, the thing was, because she's not using her legs drop. Yes, people say to me that I motivate by looking at people, and I've no idea what that is. But they say I have a look, and I don't pretend to know what that is, but I'll accept it if that's the case, because I think it's because they know that I've been there, done that, and they can't make excuses to me, because I've experienced it already. So they sort of start whinging and whining, and I say get on with it, basically. But Ros was one of those swimmers where you didn't really have to push her, because she pushed herself. She was at the end of it was a bit difficult at the end, because she was a bit disorientated, and it was pitch black because she'd taken so long. It was pitch black, 3 o'clock in the morning in Loch Ness, and there's no lights. And we got to about 50 yards from the beach, and it got very shallow for the boat. And we said head into the beach, and she turned sharp right and swam into the Caledonian Canal, which was we then had to go into the Caledonian Canal and scoop her up from among some bushes, which was rather difficult. But you know, no, some swimmers you have to motivate. Some swimmers are just a joy because they motivate themselves. I'm thinking of one swimmer, one American swimmer, back about a couple of years ago, when it was in the channel, and he, after about 6 hours, he said, I'm done. And he clearly wasn't. You know, he was clearly fine. He was still swimming fine. And he said, I'm done. And we argued with him from the boat for about 15, 20 minutes. Him treading water, us on the boat. And my thing is always, well, if they can argue, then they're not done. If they can still argue, they're not done. And we spent about 20 minutes arguing with him as he trod water. And in the end, he decided he would go on. But what we hadn't realised while we were arguing with him, the rope from the dinghy they were towing had wrapped itself around the propeller. So he had to come out anyways.
Oh,
Narelle, James, his emotional and physical motivation?
James actually is very self-motivated. It's interesting because the hardest thing I had to do, James originally wanted to go to the Paralympics, and he has a big heart, and he's very determined, and he's easy to coach. Whatever you ask him to do, he will do, no matter what, no matter how hard it is, he will do it. He's fabulous like that, always was. But I actually had to tell him he was never the Paralympics because he wasn't fast enough. But I'm sure that you would have another goal that you could look at and think about. And, you know, it was, to this day, it's the hardest thing I've ever had to do to any swimmer. And I said, go home and think about what you really want to do. And he came back the next morning and he went, I've always wanted to swim the English Channel. And that was in the beginning of the year of 1997. And I said, okay, let's do it. Well, I got a phone call from his parents that night saying, are you crazy? What have you done? It's not my world. going to ever be able to do that. That's just ridiculous. And I said, yes, he can. He'll do it. No problems. And that's what started it. So motivational wise or anything like that with James, he's just big heart, amazing ticker, just plods along, and he's got a really never give up attitude. It would take lightning, thunder, and him being absolutely devastated to say, sorry, we've got to call it off, or him sinking underneath the boat, which I've only ever seen that once, where I've had to pull him out. It was the last swim he did, and he actually hadn't done the training for it. I was surprised when I got the phone call. And he'd hurt his back when we were over in Hawaii in Molokai, and it was only because he'd hurt his back that he didn't make the swim. If he hadn't hurt his back, his determination would have got him to the other side because he was in so much pain. Otherwise, yeah, I've never had a swimmer like it in that sense of open water. Although, actually, I shouldn't say that. Actually, all the swimmers I've coached have been absolutely amazing. They're all very motivated and very determined. So I really shouldn't say that. So yeah, James that was the English Channel, and that was the start of it. And that's when we kept on hearing about James. And now he still does charity swims and work for charities and motivates people himself. He's amazing.
James is my go-to man when anybody with a vision issue looks for advice. James always volunteers to mentor them. Yeah. Go ahead, Kevin.
He's amazing.
Wearing my other hat as secretary of the Channel Swimming and Piloting Federation, the year before last, we did have a problem over what to do about a blind swimmer, because first of all, when he came to us, he wanted to be tethered to another swimmer.
Oh.
And he said he could only do it because if he was tethered, and we wouldn't allow that. And then he said he wanted some sort of hearing device so that we could shout to him or communicate with him from the boat. Now, we had him down actually with the King Swimmers training, and we succeeded in directing him the way that Narelle directed James Pittard, with blasts on whistles and directions from a boat. But he insisted that in the English Channel that wouldn't be good enough. We then had the pilots saying they weren't happy with the communication method because it would distract the swimmer if there was an emergency and they had to get them out quickly. Then we had others saying, as you've alluded to, what about if the coach then is able to do a running commentary during the swim? You allow the hearing, you allow some communication device, headphones, or it was actually a thing that when it didn't go into the ear, you probably know it goes behind the ear.
Yeah.
And we in the CSPF committee, I'm not letting out any secrets, we agonized over what we should do. In the end, we did allow that communication device, but it is an issue which because it could set a precedent for an able-bodied swimmer to then use one of those devices to be coached during the swim, which is not what we want.
And you won't allow them to have music, for example.
Yes.
Device.
Well, that again, we won't allow music because the pilots say that distracts them. If they then want to get to communicate with a swimmer, a big boat's bearing down on them, they need to stop them or veer them off to the side, to one side or other, then they can't communicate because they're distracted by the music.
Yeah, it's funny you say that. One of James's swim was the Piranha River, which is a huge waterway over in South America, and we couldn't use that large howler, but I had always coached James because I would always jump on a kayak. Like every Saturday morning, we'd go to Manly Dam, which is a big dam in Sydney, and I would jump on a kayak for 6 hours and paddle around the dam with him. And I communicated the whole time with him via whistle. I held this whistle in my mouth and did exactly the same communication. I just did short, sharp ones and then long ones for left. And that was the way I communicated with him. And when I wanted to stop him, I did that continual whistle and he knew. So it was something that we'd always worked out. So it's a shame they didn't ring and ask us how we did it, because I would have said straight away that whoever you were being coached with should have started coaching him right from the start by using some sort of sound communication, because it's really easy. I've even done it with my able-bodied swimmers, and they say,
I did actually speak to James. I did actually
sorry,
over that issue that I'm talking about. We did actually speak to James.
yeah,
and he told us the way you did it.
yeah.
But the swimmer here, he was a relay swimmer. The swimmer here said he couldn't do that.
Yeah, I think they haven't been coached like that. Like that was right from the start, because James had done other like 10-kilometer swims and other swims. So I'd been coaching him like that for years. So it was really easy because it was something he was used to and he was comfortable. You know, if you're not comfortable to start with, it's you know, it's something. It's a shame that he wasn't coached like that originally, which would have made it easier for him and for you, most definitely.
Going back to the motivation, I very much find the ability or the disability of the person is their motivation, the reason underlying the want to do something or to achieve a bigger goal. Going back to David Burke in 2013 on the North Channel, who was our first amputee to have across the channel in a relay team. And, you know, these people are turning up to coach sessions and training sessions with their disability, getting through everyday life and overcoming whatever has happened if they weren't born with it or it was an acquired disability. And yes, talking them through what the strategies are and ingraining those as normality, I think that's what's the most important. So when it comes to accessing the boat, they've been there before and they've had a practice if that's possible, and they live in a vicinity that can do that. So it makes it easier on the day. And David's successes, much as he having to get in for a third swim was downtrodden and cold, and Scotland was still another maybe 50 minutes away and the tide was changing and there was a lot of effort needed to be put in. He was driven by not only himself probably wanting to achieve and be the person to finish, but also by those on the boat, you know. And it was almost like if you're not getting in, we're going to throw you in. I think that was the words that either Padraig or Milo had said to him, you know, and that sort of overcoming that adversity. And similarly, to go back again with another team and then to go back a third time more recently with Jonty and a whole team of amputees, and how we then were strategizing and looking to see how can we make this possible. So we looked at new methods for access, which are improving as the years have gone by. The ability to use one of those roll-up devices, so it's like a roll-up sling to get the swimmer safely back on the boat so that you're not injuring the shoulders, you're not hurting them. Having extra crew on board to be able to facilitate a lift out if needed. And also then just that sort of motivational factor. Well, if someone else has done it, I can do it too, and just instilling that proudness in people, which is sometimes the motivator as well.
Jacqueline, you had several cases with Caroline, who was going for a two-way North Channel.
Yes.
Those swims were aborted with hearing issues. Dark, light doesn't really matter. She's made the turn. She's heading back. It doesn't look good. The tide is turning. How do you communicate in a situation like that to try to give the swimmer the situation, the options, to potentially convince her it's time to come out? Because Caroline is, you know, pretty focused woman. I just can't imagine how you do that.
Yeah. So on the occasions that we've had to communicate those disappointing news with Caroline, we're probably preempting it. So it has been maybe a few hours before we're saying our progress is limited. And my words with her would be short and brief. Usually if it's coming to the end of a swim, the captain or the pilot will join me as a crew member at the back of the boat to reinstill sort of what's being said. Yeah, and how far do we go, or how far have we got to go? Caroline, we still have 19 hours or 18 hours. Well, I think in our own calculations, we're not going to make it, and it's a yes or no. So yes, I think her knowledge helps, but keeping those words shorter, and yeah, you can't. There's no easy way to give bad news, but yeah, short and sweet.
Go ahead, Kevin.
I would be interested to know from Jacqueline how you did get amputees into the boat. Because Ros, for instance, says to me that her swimming has been severely restricted over the years because she can't find people overseas, pilots overseas, who will take her because of the difficulty of getting her in and out of the boat. And that's why her swims are only very limited, because she simply can't find people who will cooperate with her.
Thanks, Kevin. So one of our first go-tos was a dive boat, which had the lift at the back, so the swimmer could sit in the cradle, and then the automatic lift would propel them up to level with the boat and be able to get them back on board. Similarly, then obviously access by the marina is fine, or a slipway, as you say, sometimes can be difficult, but extra manpower to be able to get them to the start line, or to take them by boat to the start and let them swim to shore and then start from there. We were very fortunate to find a new sling device, and it was Amy Gubser's husband, Greg, who had worked with the Coast Guard for many years, and he had shown us this new sling. It's a V shape, and it attaches with 2 lines or 2 ropes to 2 central points or 2 parts of the boat. And the swimmer comes alongside and basically lies supine on their back, and the sling passes underneath, and then the people reach over it, and then the sling pulls the person back on board. Now, it obviously requires the shape of boat, or and particularly a rib. It's easy to do it with that. So we find that very useful, and we've been using that for I think this is our 3rd year now with it on the channel if need be. And it can also be very useful, particularly if a swimmer gets into difficulties, or they're come to the end of their swim and they're not going to finish, and they need to be reboarded if they're unwell. So has quite a number of good functions. So thanks, Greg, if you're listening.
You of course know we're going to ask you for full details of the sling and some pictures and schematics and cost and availability and everything else, because I think Kevin, we did an interview with a swimmer in Cork a couple months ago, and after the Lee swim, which is a 2K swim, there's a steep set of steps to come up, and I was at the top of the steps and I could see him coming in, and I was just about going to rush down the steps to help him because he's an amputee, and he simply reached up and somebody handed him his crutch, and he came up the steps, and I went like, I asked the question, like, how did that happen? And he said, look, he said, it's my responsibility. I contacted the organizers months ahead of time, explained the situation. We agreed a plan. I reminded them a month ahead of time. I reminded them a week ahead of time. I came down the day before, and then I came down early for the swim and made sure I had a crutch at the end and physically spoke to the person who was going to be there. So they were ready for me and it all worked. And he said, I can't just expect to show up and all of this stuff to be in place. I have an obligation to work it through, which is part of what Narelle was saying about James. You had to work with the Channel Swimming Association. And Kevin, you needed to find a special boat in Loch Ness. And Jacqueline, you needed to work on something with a sling. And what Jacqueline said, which she didn't really said, was they're using the sling for people without physical disabilities, because after the North Channel, there's so shattered they can't get in the boat anyways. You didn't really say that, but I have a feeling that's what you were talking about.
Sometimes, no, but or with a DNF, that's another example. Just yeah, but yes, yeah, difficult.
I've seen one of those slings actually, because I think I referred to Andy King having one. But most of the I don't know of any of the other channel boats that have got one.
So it's one of the things that hopefully will come out of this is that You know, if you're looking for assistance with a sling, for sure, Andy King's got a boat with one. So when you start looking for a pilot, you may want to start with Andy King. And thank you, Andy. Other pilots, as you get that facility, let us know, and we'll put some sort of note out. Last thoughts, folks. Kevin, getting a swimmer across the channel is a rewarding experience. Is it different with Roz? Is it 3 times rewarding, or is with Roz so determined it's yeah, well done, Roz, you know, good job, no doubts you are going to make it? Talk to us about the feeling afterwards.
It was inspirational to watch her struggle, and she did have to struggle, but I think it's because she is disabled that she is extra motivated and extra determined, and it was inspirational, and it's really because of seeing her do that and seeing her succeed and achieve it, which is why I nominated her for as an honoree of the Hall of Fame, because I was so impressed by it.
I was at the dinner the year before she did the channel where she got I didn't know who she was. She got the award for the most arduous or inspirational unsuccessful swim, 20-something hours, 800 meters from the coast was pulled. I didn't know who she was. And she came down in the wheelchair. And my table we were standing on the table, you know, knocking over wine glasses, applauding. And we were back the next year when she completed the channel. And wow, you know, just what a feeling. Narelle, James and his success, few tears shed?
Yes, the very first swim, most definitely, lots of tears shed. His mum actually was on the French coast and waiting for him, and everyone just broke down crying. It was incredibly motivational because he had no idea what he's like. They all do. He didn't know if he could do it. He really didn't. He was the first blind swimmer. We went through a lot to have, and the association was only looking after him really and us to make sure that we had all the guidelines in place. We also had to bring a lifeguard with us, and it was so motivational that he had that much trust in us because we were his eyes to get him to the other side. It was just amazing. Yeah, it was. Every swim of James was amazing, but you know, and I've been fortunate to have a lot to do with people with disabilities, and I just think they're all amazing. To be honest, they motivate me. Very, very an honour to be a coach in this situation. It really is.
I swam with James on the west coast of Ireland on a lumpy day. Let's describe it that way.
Yes.
We're in the pub afterwards, and in Ireland you tend to drink in rounds, and somebody bought a round, somebody else bought it. And it came to James's turn to buy a round, and he said, "Look, I'd buy the round, but I can't find the bar." And then broke out in the biggest smile, and we all broke up. And he handed over a bunch of money to somebody, and it was just a very funny experience. Jacqueline, inspirational for Caroline, or is Caroline just so experienced it's just another go?
Inspirational, yes. That lady is so driven, and she loves the North Channel. And to hear of her disappointments when she isn't successful or hasn't been on the two-way attempt, but to be driven to come back and want to come back again is a joy. So you know, I'll come and do it as a training swim. I'll come and do it as a so it's a yes, inspirational to have her and be successful, and maybe someday she'll come back and try again.
There's one thing, Kevin, before you pitch in. Caroline's been to Cork a number of times, and one of the things that we had to learn was you get down there and you 60, 70, 80 people getting ready to swim, and there's a slight change. There's a slight change in the plan. And yelling it out to 80 people doesn't work anymore. Because you've got a couple of people, and often she's not the only one with a hearing issue. You have a couple of people that just doesn't work on. So we tend to do more briefings in written form ahead of time. If we know the weather's going to be terrible or whatever, we do that. And then we take extra time and we kind of look directly at the person individually and say, you know, we're changing the plan. Can you understand what's happening? But we've had to be more understanding.
Yes, as an event organizer, that is important for people with communication needs, making sure they have a buddy or someone that can sort of know that they've understood or come and ask questions. Or
Go ahead, Kevin.
I just wanted to leave you with one little story, because, which I don't know whether Narelle will sort of feel the same about this. Our blind swimmer a couple of years ago came to a training session with us at the King Swimmers with his guide dog. When he went into the water, what did you do with the guide dog? Because the guide dog was rather anxious about his master going into the water. We actually tied the guide dog to the handrail of that slipway that I referred to. What we hadn't thought through actually was, as you know, in Dover, the tide comes up. As the dog was paddling, I had to go and rescue the dog.
Oh.
Getting
James,
out.
James told me a story about the Bering Strait relay. At one point, there were 4 of them in a small rib with a giant Russian support boat. The fog rolled in. They could no longer see the support boat. All but one swimmer was panicking because they didn't know where to go, what direction they were supposed to go. And James basically said something like, you know, look, it's nothing I had to worry about. I can contribute to this conversation.
Yeah. It's James. James is very good. I used to play on that with James. Just one short story about James. We used to go and swim out in the ocean a lot, a huge amount. I'd jump on a kayak and away we'd go for hours. And we were out there one time when a shark alarm went. And James put his head out and said, "Did I just hear a shark alarm?" I went, no, it's fine. And kept paddling. We came back in about an hour and a half later. He said, "I just called it was a shark alarm." I said, "What are you worried about?" I said, "You can't see it. It's me that's going to see it coming towards me and attack me." He went, "Oh, right. Yep. Didn't think about that." So it was we always laughed about, we always made jokes about him not being able to see and me being able to see the good and the bad of both of us. So, and in Dover, he did the same to me because we were putting coins in a slot to keep the electricity running and the hot water. And I was in the shower one time and it went off and he yelled out, I went, "Someone's turned the lights off," and he yelled out and said, "Now you know how I feel." So
Listen, folks, I want to thank you very much for not only taking the time today, but for putting extra time and attention and love into taking some swimmers on some great adventures. The sport doesn't work without people helping, and you're 3 great examples of helping. So I'm gonna end the interview and just let people know that we'll put the contacts up, and if you like these kind of interviews, do please subscribe to our YouTube channel. Thank you very much, everyone. Sorry.
Could I appeal to pilots and organisers and boatmen and swim officials over that if they get a disabled swimmer, to try and accommodate them, because that's what Ros has found a problem in the past. Yeah, and I presume James has as well, and Dr. Caroline Blott. If officials will go the extra mile to try and accommodate them, it would be very useful.
And to also contact us because we've got the experience to help them get through it and assure them that it can be done.
There's a website, there's a page on Open Waterpedia. If you search on disabilities, there's about 60 people around the world who volunteered to help for free and mentor or whatever they need to do to help swimmers with physical disabilities. So that's another resource for everybody. All right. Thank you very much, everyone.
Cheers.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.